Recht herzlichen Dank an die Veranstalter in erster Hinsicht und ans Montafon in generell. Es ist eine Freude, hier zu sein und zu der thematischen Veranstaltung und auch in der tollen Landschaft. Freut mich sehr, besten Dank. I will switch to English because I was writing this paper with my colleagues, Tigist Girme and Rawa Yusuf from the University of Gondar. I have worked in Ethiopia for 4 years and was assistant professor for political science in the Amara region in northern Ethiopia. So this paper is also is informed by this experience. The topic is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church as caretaker, and as a case, I will look at the Qusquam Mariam Church in Gondar, which also has some historical implications and significance. Ethiopia has experienced a long history of expropriation of its material and intellectual property. Churches and monasteries on hills and islands have become safeguards for remaining historical and sacred objects, and with that also as safeguards of wisdom. Historically, Debrec's Qusquam Mariam Church in Gondar has been taking care of certain knowledge, rights, and relationships for the people of the region. After a stay at said church in the 1770s, the Scottish James Bruce took the Book of Enoch, among other items, to Europe. Focusing on this exemplary case, broader implications of loss of property and identity attached to manuscript and detailed here as well the role of churches and monasteries in mountains as caretakers in a physical, spiritual, emotional, and also epistemical sense. The paper is structured in five parts. First, I will give you a short introduction of the paper and the topic. Then I will explain how the question is framed theoretically. Then I will go into the details of the church, and then include how who James Bruce was and what the significance of the Book of Enoch for this region, and then come to a conclusion. The research topic is the role of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church as caretaker of material, cultural, sacred, religious, and intellectual property. And the question we were trying to answer is, what does the case of the Book of Enoch tell us about issues of material, cultural, and intellectual property? As for methods, we are mainly reviewing literature, and there's extensive literature on Ethiopia in general, also on the Book of Enoch and the history of the Gondarian period. And we interviewed several people. As Gebretseak is the main source, who is working at the church, living at the church. And I was also, when we were trying to figure out which church to focus on, it's difficult in Ethiopia because there are so many churches and so many churches also on hilltops, so many monasteries. They have a long history of monastery culture and life. And I was also asking tour guides which one they would suggest, and found out that tour guides, maybe that's also the same here in Montafon. Tour guides are a really good source because they go regularly and they go over and over and explain the history. And they also get contracted by scientists, also by historians, by archaeologists, maybe also by you. To go to certain places, so I found them to be a very good source, and I thank them also for sending a lot of pictures and making many suggestions. We focused then on on Gebre Qusquam because of its significance, which I will get to in more detail later. So these are photos some of the tour guides sent me, and there are a lot of churches in Ethiopia on hilltops and also in other regions, and I will go a little bit on the connection between Ethiopia and Christianity. in general, Ethiopian people, and I'm referring more to the north, and I'm going to leave the south aside, which is more complex and more difficult to explain within this focus. Ethiopian people are very religious. There are hardly any atheists. The vast majority are Orthodox Christians, followed by maybe 30% Muslims, and there are also some communities of Catholics and Protestants and Jews. Religious leaders remain the main authority figures. Christianity plays a huge role. The calendar also is focused on Christian history. They follow the Julian calendar. The months have 30 days, and it starts with St. Mary, of course. And each of the day is focused on one other saint, and according to the days of the saint, they go to certain churches. There are 9 fasting seasons, and the fasting seasons in Orthodox Christianity also structure the annual calendar and life in general. The churches provide spiritual care, medical care. They have holy water. They give therapy. They provide welfare and social life. Also, in terms of education, the traditional schools are still in use, and they use ancient books and didactics to teach the students, the school students, but also common people usually go to get biblical lessons. The national language of Ethiopia is Amharinya, which is an ancient language, and it uses the same orthography as Ge'ez, in which the Bible also, older versions of the Bible were written. Ethiopia plays also a huge role in the history of Christianity, because it was also a safeguard. At the bottom left picture, you see a picture of Lalibela, and during times of conflicts when also Christianity was threatened, in Ethiopia a lot of churches were hidden, and these ones were caved into stone so that people could practice, and they have churches for each important place in Jerusalem, so people, when they were not able to pilgrim to Jerusalem, they could go to Lalibela instead. You may have heard of the Queen of Sheba, who's based in Ethiopia. Yesterday, Simone Paganini mentioned that maybe it is unknown where the Bundeslade, the Ark of the Covenant, is located. If you ask Ethiopians, every Ethiopian, from child to elder, they can tell you. Of course, it's in St. Mary's Church in Qusquam. So the Christianity has a long history. We also asked Gabriel Tzadik about his perception, and he says that church and monasteries were built on mountaintops to isolate themselves from the people, from general life, from drama, so to speak. Usually mountains are accompanied with lots of forests, and when they want to build churches, they choose places that are away from the city and more quite comfortable for monasteries, so that people can focus on prayer. The churches are mainly on mountaintops, because of the water sources also, and the more distant ones were chosen to safeguard certain sacred objects. Over the centuries, in fact millennia, there had been a lot of incidents when religious symbols, materials, buildings, the religion itself came under attack. There were conflicts with Jews, with Muslims in the 16th century. Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Ghrain, Ahmed Ghrain the left-handed, conquered Christian Abyssinia and caused mass destruction. This was followed by mass destruction of mosques in the country. But for the past centuries, Muslims and Christians have been living in peace together. There were also conflicts with other Christian denominations. Because of cases like this, remote churches were built on hilltops and islands and served as safe places for treasured manuscripts and sacred objects. So saving the objects also safeguards the wisdom, the practices, and in its sense, religion itself. When I came here yesterday, I came from Berlin, and you may have heard of the Humboldt Forum. And during the construction of the Humboldt Forum, there was a lot of debate about restitution and belongings of objects that were taken from the Global South. So I'm also framing the topic around questions of restitution, of ownership. And I was also impressed by the book Afrikas Kampf seine Kunst von Benedict Savoy, who's also in Berlin, where she also gave a lot of agency to Africans themselves to ask for reconstruction. She focused on preußischer Kulturbesitz and also on the British Museum, and the British Museum is also the one that holds the Book of Enoch today. She criticized the West's claim to serve as cultural guardian while refusing to return looted items. So the term of cultural guardian I want to take up later. I also want to take up later a coin used a lot in the debate about ownership and holding of objects belonging to the Global South, retain and explain, to keep it and then to interpret it. And Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie was in Berlin for the opening of the Humboldt Forum, and she gave a very impressive speech in which she also explained the violent continuities and legacies of material and cultural expropriation and the refusal of restitution. The argument of Western Museum to retain and explain leaves the rightful owners with nothing, and it also hinders is hindering and violent in a lot of ways, she said. In this debate about restitution, Ethiopia plays a different role, but also an interesting role, because Ethiopia was not colonized, so you don't have the same dynamics that you have with other countries. It also was already Christian when Europeans colonized the African continent, civilizing on their so-called civilizing mission, and also Christianizing, because Ethiopia was also Christianized, so it plays a different role in this debate. Questions of looting, spoils of war, theft, or however taking other people's property may be termed, has a long history in the Old Testament. The part in 2 Chronicles 14, 12-13 attests to Ethiopians having to bear the brunt of war because foreign soldiers carried away spoils of war. The distinction between the spoils of war and stealing is made in public debate already for over 2,000 years. Since antiquity, some generals ordered their soldiers to exercise some restraint when it came to certain objects that were considered illegitimate to take away, even if the former proprietor could no longer defend these objects. In particular, religious objects located in temples were seen as belonging to the place where they were found. In Ethiopia, the Magdala treasures play a special historical role in this debate. They are spoils of war or war loot. In next year, 2022, we can commemorate the 150th anniversary of the first formal Ethiopian claims made for the restitution of at least some of the Magdala treasures. In 1872, Emperor Johannes requested from Queen Victoria to return of a manuscript and an icon. On advice of the government, the manuscript Kebra Negist was in fact returned by the British Museum. Richard Pankhurst acidly noted that, quote, it was the only acquisition of the museum ever to be restored to its former owners. Many have pointed out that at around the same time, then British Prime Minister William Gladstone conceded that he deeply regretted that those articles were brought from Abyssinia and could not conceive why they were brought. The Magdala treasures are described as looted and stolen objects. Pankhurst spoke in no uncertain terms, quote, of the extensive looting of which the British exposition against Theodore Odros was guilty. Pankhurst's language about guilt is derived from criminal law. It is meant to be a verdict on the illegality of an act described as looting. Volker Matthys claims that theft of art for the sake of the state is one of the oldest forms of organized criminality. The global post-colonial debate on extra-European objects held in Western museums has in the meantime reached the museum administrators and politicians in charge of cultural questions. The legitimacy of taking away cultural property from its place of origin play a major role in this debate. There is now, as cultural theorist Ruth Phillips argues, a global movement towards a post-colonial museology powered by the anti-colonial activism of indigenous peoples in an informal alliance with academic post-structural critics of museum representation. While questions of representation and multi-perspectivity in the exhibition of these objects are hotly contested between various stakeholders, others consider these questions outdated. The question is no longer how to better exhibit in Western museums these objects originated from the Global South. The question is rather how and when and to whom to return these objects that were unjustly taken to their places of origin. Though there have been initiatives now and then to facilitate the return of these stolen heritages, the outcomes have not been pleasing. The note on Ethiopian cultural objects abroad before UNESCO in July 1981 didn't bring any results. In 2007, Ethiopia lodged a formal restitution claim for hundreds of artifacts held by British institutions. Ethiopia's request has been refused. In preparation for the 150th anniversary in 2018 of the Battle of Magdala, from where many items were stolen, British museum directors offered a long-term loan. The Ethiopian government refused a loan and continues to ask for the items to be returned. Activists point out in irony, quote, "It was okay for the goods to be looted, but it's not okay for them to be returned." End of quote. Sorry, I still have to cover the violence. Maybe you're familiar with Claudia Brunner from Klagenfurt. She wrote an excellent book which was published last year on epistemic violence. It's in German, but it's a great book, and I can refer to this one about the coloniality of knowledge, on how taking wisdom, taking knowledge, and then also dominating a discourse also involves violence and the power games. In the colonial context, indigenous knowledge systems were destroyed in their so-called civilizing missions. Jirga Gala-Woldis also noted that while the absence of Guy's manuscripts denied and continues to deny Ethiopians the chance to enrich their indigenous education, it benefited Western Orientalists to garner intellectual authority in the field of Ethiopian studies. So I'll just go better to the church, which is located in Gondar, on 2,241 meters and close to Fasilides Castle. And Fasilides Castle and also the Qusquam church are under UNESCO heritage site. The place is very significant also for Empress Mintowap, who built it and who lived there. She is a very religious person who built several churches, who also developed church art, and who plays a huge role in Ethiopian history. When her husband, the emperor, passed away, her son was then 7 years old, became the king, and then she was crowned as the empress in order to rule in his place. The Debrecen Qusquam church was destroyed in 1881 by the Mahdists for the first time, and in 1941 by the British, who were aiding the Ethiopians fighting Italian occupation. The church honors two saints. Saint Miraculous is a Roman saint who has performed many miracles, and Saint Mary is praised in Orthodox religion. As Gabriel Zeig commented, Mariam has a great place in our hearts. She's the mother of our Lord. You can't spend a single day without mentioning her name. The place served as church, also as a place where important people came, including Abune Johannes, a pope from Egypt at that time, who came to spend time there and bestow titles on the students. It was also a place where justice was brought, and today there's a debate to reinstitute the informal courts, the shimagli, at the church to bring justice instead of going to the court. Also, there's still a religious church. The church school is still active. There's also a museum which holds several historical objects. The church also held the Book of Enoch, which was taken by James Bruce when he was there. The Book of Enoch includes several biblical knowledge, astrology, medicine, and research. The book was originally written in Aramaic and has been translated into 5 ancient languages. Fragments in Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, Syriac, and Coptic were saved, but a complete version was only available in Ge'ez. The book contains, among other topics, apocalyptic descriptions older than the one in John's Revelation, which were lost in all other languages. Both the Ethiopian and the Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo churches consider the Book of Enoch as canonical scripture. About the time of the Protestant Reformation came a renewed interest in the Book of Enoch, and by the late 1400s, rumors began to spread that there's a copy somewhere available. And during this time, also James Bruce came to Ethiopia funded by the British Crown with the expectation that he will return goods to England. He stayed in Ethiopia for 6 years. He tried to find the source of the Blue Nile and others. And he spent 5 years at Qusquam, where he was hosted by the empress. As Gabriel Zadig said, James Bruce lived here for 5 years. When he was here, he learned about Wudasse, Mariam, Qene, and David. When he left, he stole the Book of Enoch. People say that he did not only take the Book of Enoch, but also the Book of Rai Johannes. But this is not confirmed. The original Book of Enoch is now in England, and the copy is available at Zwei. They are asking to have the original book returned to Ethiopia, end of quote. The book has, in the meantime, been scanned, and there's also the question, it was scanned without prior informed consent, and there's also the question on the implications of putting a spiritual, religious knowledge on the internet without the prior informed consent. The library asks the users to please be, the manuscript should not be altered or used in a way that may be derogatory or offensive, but people on the internet everywhere in the world may not necessarily know what is offensive for the Ethiopian case. There was one case in which Jirga Gallo-Woldis called out 2 authors from the United States who were interpreting the life and struggles of our mother Violeta Petros, and Jirga claims that the interpretation harms history, culture, and identity of the people from where they were taken, and continues unchallenged and without consultation, because they do not know. In his 90-page comment, he writes that they don't know the language and also not the context in which they interpret the story. To come to a conclusion, the Ethiopian case has several particularities. One is that it's not a colonial setting, so you cannot really use the decolonial debate, because Ethiopians say, well, why decolonize? We've never been colonized. Also, the Book of Enoch is not war loot, it's cultural property, so it falls out of those two larger debates. Then there has been the Christian experience and expertise already, and the expertise that runs deep because they have knowledge of the original texts. And then as you look to as you watch the church, especially on the mountains, you also see the lived experience. In a copy, I mentioned to a colleague that I want to write something about a Book of Enoch, and he says, oh, and he pulls it out of his pocket. I read it. So the reprint is actually a bestseller in Ethiopia. Everybody reads it. Everybody's interested in traditional knowledge. And Ethiopian general people also go to these monasteries. It's part of everyday life. And Ethiopian Orthodox churches function as cultural guardians, as interpreters. So retain and explain is better done in Ethiopia than maybe at the British Museum. They act as teachers, and they are also the authorities of Ethiopian texts. This is one of the scanned pages, and on the right side you see a Kolo school, and a church school. So this is where a lot of the students still learn with the original objects. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church takes good care of Christian objects, beliefs, traditions, knowledge. They do so by living, learning, and teaching in a holistic sense. Access to their property would help in this endeavor. From the mountains, they were taking care, and they can do so better if they are, well, as any educational institution, they can take better care if they are well resourced, and getting access to their resources would help them to also be even better caretakers. Thank you for your attention.
So, haben Sie vielen Dank für Ihren spannenden Vortrag. Gibt es bereits Fragen?
Thank you very much for inspiring talk. Actually, I was not aware of this GIS version of the Book of Enoch, but sorry, I don't think I fully grasped the issue, because the book was not, I gather, not war looted, but just somehow acquired by this Bruce. So what's wrong with this? What wrong did he do that it's now the issue of returning the book? Did he buy it or steal it? If you could give a few details which would allow ignorance like me to understand what's the real issue about this book, and I'm very happy that it's now widely available. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's something that we are trying to also get a better understanding of. We have one version, but also in academia you need two sides of the story. So still from the museum we didn't get an answer, which may be the case that in Ethiopia a lot of the universities don't have institutional addresses, so you have to write from a Gmail address. And so far, we didn't get any response. It's at the border lane. I had to skip this one. There's one in Paris, and two are at border lane in England. And so far, we only have the version that's dominant in Ethiopia. And if you ask in Ethiopia, you can ask anyone from the ministry to the churches, to the church in Qusquam. He stole it. So from this version, there was one book there that they kept, which he wanted to read and learn from. And apparently, while he was there, he had 2 copies made. He paid someone to make 2 copies. And when he left, he took the 3 books with him without asking he just took them. And he was not supposed to take it. So that's the case they're arguing, and we're trying to get the other side. If anyone has connections or also literature, would be appreciated.
Gibt es noch weitere Fragen?
Thank you for your talk. You mentioned that many churches are on hilltops. Is there any explanation why is this? Are there, let's say, is there evidence for pre-Christian places of veneration, or are there any kind of explanations concerning cultic continuity, or how can we explain this phenomenon you have been hinting at?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I was also asking our informants. They're all Christians, so they only bring forward the Christian answer, that they were put on hilltops to be closer to God, to be away from people, to be able to concentrate. You have also a lot of monasteries in caves. And the main argument is to be away and to be devoted to prayer. And then another reason is for water sources. A lot of, in several mountains or where the monasteries are at, you have springs, and they are regarded as holy water. And they probably have been used prior to that. And also a lot of the springs are also regarded as sacred by Muslim communities. So there's probably a prior, but I'm not aware of it. And the ones I ask, they only hint to the Christian history.
Are you also aware, is there, let's say, a concept of a holy mountain or something like this?
It's the difference between the north and the south. In the north, people follow monotheist religions, and they strongly argue within this framework. And the Christianity has arrived in Ethiopia very early and was a national religion in the 4th century. So there is a long history, and the knowledge of certain places prior to that is not known to me. But I can follow up with that with my colleagues.
Here comes another question.
Thank you very much for your very interesting talk. I have a question regarding this book of Enoch and perhaps regarding the Ethiopian identity. Is it important for them to get this book back, and do they view these monasteries and churches as a link to their past with the ancient Aksum, or is there any link to their identity, or do they think of this memorabilia as part of their past, or is it really just their religious connotation that they want, or they see it in this regard that it was stolen and they want it back?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's indeed a part of identity and also pride. They're very proud that they have this long history of statehood, a long history of Ethiopia, we as Ethiopian people, a long history also with the church, and also to be safeguarded as a church. And something that really impressed me when I was in Ethiopia, and I also went to several of these monasteries, which is, you have to be in shape. That they are still in use. And also I went back to this one because maybe you can read the subtitle. They take a lot of pride in Enoch that he wrote this book, and they claim him as their own. And when you go to these churches, also when I went to visit Lalibela, there are people there. So they're still, it's not something of the past. The past is also present. All the ceremonies, also in Aksum, for their ceremonies, they practice them as they did 1,500 years ago. the same songs, the same language, the same ritual. At Lalibela, those are not tourists. Those are all local people who go there. If you go in other countries to old churches, you see an old church, but no people. But there it's lived experience, so they still live it. And in the past, I have been researching on indigeneity, and I have experienced the church in a very destructive sense. As mentioned, I studied Lakota leadership and management on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And there were these kind of mission schools. They were recently in the news for the residential, the boarding schools, where they wiped out wisdom, but also killed a lot of people. And they imposed their knowledge system on the indigenous people. And I had that was my sense of indigenous people and Christianity. They don't go well together. In Ethiopia, I had a different experience, and it seemed that Christianity is or has become also like an indigenous religion because the way it is rooted and what indigeneity does, to be rooted in a place, to be caretaker of a place, also to build relationships, is very much also what the Orthodox religion does there and maybe also in other regions.
Any other?
I just have an additional question. You mentioned Orthodox Church, but you never used the word Coptic. So when I was there and I learned it, so they were always talking about Coptic Church, but I'm not, I don't know the details. Maybe you have your reason for this word?
Thank you for the question. I had to leave out a lot. They have a connection to the Coptic Church, and they have a strong connection also to Egypt, and also the Patriarch, the Pope that I mentioned earlier. He came from the Coptic Church to Ethiopia, and he was regarded as the Patriarch, but the Ethiopian Tewahedo Church now has their own Patriarch in the country. And earlier, something that I also skipped, but Empress Mentewab was also, she was very religious, and there were a lot of factions and fractions within the church and also in the political life. And the big sects at that time were Kebat and Tewahedo, and she was able to unite them or to bring them together. And only when her grandson was killed, this Gondorian epoch ended, where there was relative peacefulness, and after that the era of princes started, where you had a lot of different princes and kingdoms that were fighting each other. Yeah, but I didn't bring in the Coptic Church just because of the time. Any more specific question to the Coptic Church?
No, it's just a terminology. I had the idea that the whole Church of Ethiopia was Coptic, but maybe I'm wrong.
And they're not. They call themselves Tewahedo Church, Orthodox Tewahedo Church.
Any other questions, remarks, or comments? So, if not, I want to thank you very much for your interesting talk, and thank you very much.